On a Thursday morning in the spring of 1973, a 17-year-old girl named Patty Wilson laced up her running shoes in La Mirada, California, and told her father that she wanted to run from Los Angeles to San Francisco. Her father, Jim Wilson, looked at his daughter and did not immediately say no. He was a runner himself. He understood something about what running meant and what it could do for a person. But he also knew that his daughter had epilepsy, that she had been having seizures since she was 8 years old, that the medical community had told her family that vigorous physical activity was a risk for someone with her condition. He said yes anyway. The run took 14 days. Patty Wilson ran an average of 30 miles each day across the length of California. She had seizures during the run. She kept going. She arrived in San Francisco, having covered more than 400 miles on foot, and having demonstrated something to herself and to everyone who watched her do it that no doctor's assessment of what was possible for someone with epilepsy had been able to teach her, that she was capable of far more than the limitations assigned to her suggested. And this story is about that capacity, not just Patty Wilson's specific and extraordinary capacity, the human capacity for physical achievement that consistently exceeds what we believe to be its limits, the science behind why that capacity is so much larger than we typically recognize, the specific mechanisms through which ordinary people access extraordinary physical performance, and the stories of the individuals who have pushed so far beyond the accepted boundaries of human capability that they have permanently expanded what we understand those boundaries to be. The human body is a profoundly underestimated machine. This is not a motivational statement. It is a conclusion supported by decades of research in exercise physiology, sports science, psychology, and the specific study of extreme human physical performance. The gap between what the average person believes their body is capable of and what their body can actually do when properly prepared and properly motivated is enormous in ways that the research literature has documented with considerable consistency. The central mechanism through which that gap manifests is what scientists call the central governor. The theory, developed by South African exercise physiologist Tim Noakes across the 1990s and 2000s, proposes that physical performance is not primarily limited by the physiological capacity of muscles and cardiovascular systems. It is primarily limited by the brain, specifically by a protective system in the brain that monitors the body's physiological status during exercise and generates the sensation of exhaustion before the body has actually reached its physiological limits. The central governor theory reframes the experience of hitting a wall during physical exertion. The wall is not a physiological reality. It is a neurological signal. The brain is not reporting that the body cannot continue. It is generating a powerful motivation to stop, that it can adjust based on additional information. The signal is real, and the experience of it is genuinely distressing. But it is not the final word on what the body is capable of doing. The evidence for this reframing comes from multiple sources that have accumulated across decades of sports science research. The most consistent finding is that people who believe they are at their physical limit can in almost every documented case produce additional output when provided with specific types of external information or motivation. The cyclist who believes they have nothing left and then accelerates when told the finish line is 200 meters rather than 500 meters. The marathon runner who finds a sprint at the end of a race they believed they had given everything in. The patient in a rehabilitation context who produces movement the previous week's testing suggested should not be possible. None of these examples require extraordinary human beings. They are documented patterns across ordinary people in ordinary circumstances. The central governor adjusts. The body continues beyond the point where the brain had been reporting completion was impossible. Dean Karnazes is one of the most extensively studied ultra-endurance athletes in history, and his documented physical capacity has contributed significantly to the scientific understanding of where the upper limits of human endurance actually lie. He has run 50 marathons in 50 consecutive days across 50 American states. He has run 350 miles in 80 hours and 44 minutes without sleeping. He has completed the Badwater Ultramarathon, which covers 135 miles through Death Valley in July, when temperatures regularly exceed 130 degrees Fahrenheit. The scientific examinations of Karnazes' physiology conducted across his career have produced findings that challenge standard models of human endurance limitations. His lactate threshold, his ability to clear the metabolic byproducts of intense muscular effort, operates at a level that the standard physiological models would predict should produce muscular failure at a fraction of the outputs he sustains. His cardiovascular system's ability to maintain oxygen delivery to working muscles across durations that would produce complete glycogen depletion. In standard models, has been studied without producing a fully satisfying physiological explanation. What Karnazes himself describes as the difference between his capacity and that of most people is not primarily physiological, it is psychological. The ability to be present with extraordinary discomfort without generating the narrative of impossibility that typically transforms discomfort into a reason to stop. He describes pain as information rather than as a command. The information tells him about what his body is doing. It does not tell him that he cannot continue. That is a distinction that sounds simple and that is profoundly difficult to maintain in practice across the duration of efforts that extend across multiple days. Wim Hof represents a different category of documented human physical capacity. His ability to maintain physiological stability in conditions of extreme cold that would produce dangerous hypothermia in standard timelines has been verified in controlled laboratory conditions, with a consistency that has forced exercise physiologists and immunologists to take seriously capabilities that they would previously have dismissed as impossible. He swam under ice for 66 meters on a single breath. He ran a full marathon above the Arctic Circle wearing only shorts. He climbed to approximately 23,000 feet on Everest, wearing nothing but shorts and shoes, before turning back by choice. These are verified performances. They are not estimated or reported by advocates. They are documented by observers and by physiological measurements taken before and after the performances. The laboratory research into Hof's capabilities produced the finding that has been most significant for the scientific understanding of human physiology. He appears able to voluntarily influence his autonomic nervous system and his innate immune response in ways that the standard model of human physiology holds to be impossible. The autonomic nervous system, the system that regulates heart rate, breathing, digestion, and other functions, not under conscious control, was thought to be exactly that, not under conscious control. Hof's documented ability to sustain physiological stability in extreme cold correlates with measurable changes in his inflammatory markers and his adrenaline levels that match what he reports doing internally. The mechanism is not fully understood. The phenomenon has been replicated in controlled conditions with other people who have been trained in his methods to a degree that rules out individual biological exceptionalism as the full explanation. What this suggests is that the relationship between conscious volition and physiological function is different from what the standard model has assumed. The body is capable of things that the conscious mind has previously not had access to. The access appears to be possible through specific practices. The practices are difficult and require sustained commitment, but they are learnable. Diane Van Daren underwent a surgery in 1997 to address the epilepsy that had been producing regular seizures since her early 20s. The surgery removed a piece of her right temporal lobe. The outcome in terms of seizure control was positive. The outcome in terms of her cognitive functioning was unusual in ways that scientists have since studied as a specific case study in the relationship between brain structure and physical performance. The surgery affected her ability to track time and distance. She cannot accurately estimate how long she's been running or how far she has traveled. This sounds like a disability. In the context of ultra-endurance running, it has functioned as an advantage. The psychological limit that most runners reach when they calculate how much further they have to go and compare that distance to how depleted they currently feel does not operate in the same way for Van Daren. She cannot make that calculation. She is always simply in the present moment of the run. She has won some of the most demanding ultra-endurance events in the world, including the Yukon Arctic Ultra, a 430-mile race through the Canadian wilderness in temperatures that drop well below minus 50 degrees Celsius. She has done this in her 50s, after brain surgery, against competitors who are decades younger and whose training and preparation followed conventional approaches. The scientists who have studied her have used her case to examine a fundamental question about what limits physical performance in ultra-endurance contexts. The honest answer the research supports is that the limits are substantially psychological rather than physiological. The mechanisms Van Daren has available to manage discomfort and manage the passage of time are different from the mechanisms available to most competitors. The results suggest that those mechanisms matter more than the physiological factors that most training frameworks prioritize. The specific story of Erik Weihenmayer adds another dimension to this evidence. He became the first blind person to summit Mount Everest in 2001. By 2008, he had completed the 7 summits, the highest peak on each of the 7 continents. His process for navigating terrain he cannot see involves a combination of sound and touch and spatial mapping that he has developed across decades of practice in the specific conditions that blindness creates. The conventional understanding of what mountaineering requires assumes vision as the fundamental tool for route finding and hazard assessment. Weihenmayer's achievements document that the fundamental tool can be replaced by other sensory and cognitive approaches. The body's ability to navigate complex physical environments does not require the specific sensory channel that the standard model assumes it requires. It requires information processing. The channel through which the information arrives can vary. What this means for the understanding of human physical capacity is not simply that blind people can climb mountains. It means that the body's capacity to manage extreme physical challenges is more adaptable than standard models assume. The specific mechanisms through which the body processes information and makes decisions about physical output are plastic in ways that training and experience can shape profoundly. The research on pain tolerance and physical performance has produced findings that are relevant here and that the popular understanding of physical limits does not adequately account for. The relationship between the experience of pain and physical output capacity is not a simple inverse relationship, where more pain means less capacity. It is mediated by cognitive and emotional factors that can be trained and that vary considerably across individuals and across contexts for the same individual. Studies examining pain tolerance in athletes compared to non-athletes have found that the difference is not primarily physiological. Athletes do not experience less pain in response to equivalent stimuli. They experience the same pain and have developed different cognitive and emotional responses to it that allow them to continue performing despite it. The difference is in the interpretation of the signal rather than in the signal itself. This finding has profound implications for the understanding of physical limits. The limit is not where the pain starts. The limit is where the response to the pain produces cessation of effort. That response is trainable. The brain that has practiced being present with pain without generating the narrative that the pain requires stopping develops a different relationship to the signal. The signal remains. The response to it changes. Chrissy Wellington won 4 Ironman World Championship titles in Kona, Hawaii. The Ironman triathlon involves a 2.4-mile swim followed by a 112-mile bike ride, followed by a marathon. The Kona course does this in conditions of heat and humidity and wind that make the standard physiological demands of the event significantly more severe. Wellington's dominance of the event was documented across her career, not simply in terms of outcomes, but in terms of the specific way she competed. She was known for race day performances that exceeded what her training data suggested she was capable of. The gap between her training performance and her competition performance was larger and more consistent than the standard sports science models of supercompensation predict. The explanation she offered for that gap was not physiological. She described the experience of competition as producing access to something that training did not. A state of complete absorption in the physical effort that suspended the cognitive monitoring that typically generates the experience of limitation. She was not thinking about how much it hurt or how far she had to go. She was inside the effort itself in a way that the mental environment of training competition did not produce. This is a description of a psychological state that appears across the accounts of extraordinary physical performers with sufficient consistency to be taken seriously as a real phenomenon. A state of complete present moment engagement with physical effort that suspends the forward-looking calculation that generates the experience of limits. Athletes have described versions of this state across sports and across cultures, using different language, but describing a consistent set of characteristics. The flow state research of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi provides a framework for understanding what these athletes are describing. Flow is characterized by complete absorption in a challenging activity, by a sense of effortlessness that accompanies what is objectively effortful, by loss of self-consciousness and loss of time perception, and by a sense of control that does not feel like struggle. The relevance to extreme physical performance is that flow states appear to correlate with access to physical capacity that the standard experience of effort does not permit. The psychological experience of effortlessness is accompanied by physical outputs that are genuinely above what the same person can produce in non-flow states. The mechanism is not fully understood, but it is observed consistently enough across multiple research contexts to be considered a real phenomenon rather than a subjective reporting artifact. Patty Wilson continued running across her life. The 17-year-old who ran from Los Angeles to San Francisco became an adult who maintained her running practice and her commitment to demonstrating what people with epilepsy could accomplish. She ran across America multiple times. She ran to raise awareness and funds for epilepsy research and for the organizations that support people living with the condition. Her father, Jim, continued running alongside her for much of her life. The father who said yes to a 17-year-old's plan to run 400 miles across California became a man who spent decades running with his daughter and who understood from the inside what she had discovered, that the body is capable of things that the assigned limitations of a medical diagnosis do not capture, that the experience of discovering that capacity changes the relationship between a person and their sense of what is possible in their life. The research that has accumulated around extreme human physical performance does not suggest that everyone can do what Dean Karnazes or Wim Hof or Chrissy Wellington does. The specific combination of genetic endowment and psychological makeup and accumulated training that produces the extreme outliers is not universally available. What the research does suggest is that the gap between what most people believe they are capable of and what they are actually capable of is substantially larger than their beliefs about themselves reflect. The central governor that generates exhaustion before the body reaches its physiological limits is adjustable. The pain response that the brain generates to motivate cessation of effort is interpretable rather than commanding. The psychological state of complete present moment absorption in physical effort that suppresses the experience of limitation is accessible to ordinary people in ordinary contexts with specific types of practice and preparation. The practical implication is not that everyone should attempt to run across California or swim under ice. It is that the physical limits we assign to ourselves in ordinary life are frequently set inside our actual capacity rather than at it. The evidence that documents the extraordinary physical capacity of the outliers is simultaneously evidence about the mechanisms through which ordinary physical capacity operates. And those mechanisms are more responsive to psychological and experiential factors than the standard model of physical performance has typically acknowledged. Patty Wilson ran from Los Angeles to San Francisco in 1973 because she wanted to show what someone with epilepsy could do. She showed something larger than that. She showed what the relationship between belief and physical capacity actually is. She believed she could do it before she knew she could do it. And the belief proceeded and enabled the performance in ways that the physiological facts of her condition would not have predicted. The science that has developed across the decades since that run has provided increasingly specific and increasingly verified accounts of why that relationship between belief and physical capacity is real. The brain is the primary governor of physical performance. The governor's settings are responsive to information and experience and practice. The limits that feel like physiological facts are frequently psychological constructions that the body can exceed when the conditions that maintain them are changed. The body is capable of far more than we believe. The evidence is overwhelming and consistent. The most extraordinary human physical performances in documented history are not simply testimony to the exceptional nature of the individuals who achieved them. They are testimony to the nature of human physical capacity itself. The capacity is there. The access to it depends on what we believe is possible. And what we believe is possible can change. Patty Wilson changed what she believed was possible for herself on a run across California in 1973. What she discovered across those 14 days and 400 miles became the foundation of everything that followed in her life. Not because the run solved her epilepsy or made her medical condition easier, but because it established in her own experience that the assigned limits were not the actual limits. That discovery is available to more people than the extreme outliers whose stories fill the sports science literature. It is available to anyone willing to examine the gap between what they believe they can do and what the evidence about human physical capacity suggests they might be capable of. The gap is almost always larger than the belief suggests. The evidence is consistent. The body is ready when the belief is.